I came home before dawn, exhausted in the way only airports and red-eye flights can hollow you out. The hallway light was on. The lock turned easily, too easily, like the place had stopped being mine while I was gone. I stepped inside carrying the smell of recycled air and cheap coffee, expecting silence, expecting the relief of familiar walls. Instead, the door to my own apartment opened inward from the other side. A man stood there barefoot and irritated, wearing a t-shirt that didn't belong to him but fit like it had been chosen on purpose. He reacted to my presence the way people react to interruptions, not intrusions. The apartment behind him looked rearranged, lived in differently, softened by someone else's habits. From deeper inside, the woman I planned to marry made a decision about me without even seeing my face. That was the moment my future collapsed into a narrow hallway at 4 in the morning. I didn't shout or ask questions because nothing in that scene needed clarification. The timing was precise, the confidence unmistakable, the casual ownership impossible to misread. People who think they're being caught panic. People who think they're safe issue instructions. I was not a surprise to them. I was an inconvenience. I left without grabbing anything except my phone and wallet. The door closed behind me with the same smooth indifference it had opened. Outside, the city was quiet in the way cities get before sunrise, pretending to sleep while everything important happens in the dark. I stood there listening to my own breathing and realized that the relationship I thought I had was already over somewhere between my departure gate and my return. 3 weeks earlier, I had hugged her goodbye at that same door. She had pressed her face into my jacket and talked about wedding plans, guest lists, colors, timelines. She had kissed me like distance was temporary and loyalty was permanent. She had promised nothing unusual would happen while I was gone, which at the time felt like reassurance and now felt like rehearsal. The business trip itself had been brutal. Long days, longer nights, negotiations that required patience I barely had. I had slept in hotels that smelled identical and eaten meals alone while texting her updates that received hearts and affectionate replies. The whole time, I carried the calm certainty that there was something solid waiting for me at home. That certainty had been a lie I told myself because it was comfortable. As the sky began to lighten, the details started lining up with sickening clarity. The sudden request to keep the spare key with a neighbor. The way she had insisted on redecorating the living room while I was gone. The odd gaps in her replies, explained away as meetings, errands, fatigue. None of it mattered before. All of it mattered now. I sat in my car and watched the windows of the building as if they might confess. They stayed dark. People who are comfortable don't rush. People who think they've won don't hide. By the time morning traffic started, I had made 2 decisions. The first was that I would not beg, confront, or seek explanations. Nothing humiliates faster than demanding decency from people who have already demonstrated they don't value it. The second was that I would not disappear. Leaving quietly would have been easy. Staying present would be effective. I went to a cafe and ordered breakfast I couldn't taste. I opened my laptop and began reviewing shared accounts, shared subscriptions, shared obligations. Weddings create paperwork long before they create memories. Deposits had been paid. Contracts signed. Names combined. Every line item represented trust converted into logistics. Logistics can be reversed with enough precision. The apartment lease was in both our names, but the guarantor was me. The utilities ran through my accounts. The internet, the insurance, the furniture purchases, the appliances. The ring sat in a safe deposit box under my name because she had joked about losing things. Jokes are often rehearsals too. I didn't go back to the apartment that day. I booked a hotel nearby, close enough to observe without engaging. From there, I watched my phone light up with messages that pretended confusion, concern, then irritation when confusion failed to work. I didn't respond. Silence is not weakness when it's deliberate. Silence is leverage. By evening, I had spoken to the landlord, the bank, and a lawyer recommended by a colleague who specialized in disentangling lives that had been merged prematurely. Each conversation stripped another layer of illusion from what I thought I was building. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a misallocation of resources. Night came again, bringing the same hour back around with different weight. Somewhere in that apartment, my fiancée was explaining me away, recasting me as unreasonable, absent, expendable. People rewrite history fastest when the present is indefensible. I let her. I slept better than expected. Betrayal is clarifying when you stop arguing with it. In the morning, I dressed carefully, not to impress anyone, but to remind myself that I was still in control of what came next. I returned to work and performed like nothing had happened, because professionalism is the last refuge of people who refuse to be broken in public. By the end of the day, the plan was set. Assets would be separated. Access would be limited. Timelines would be enforced. The wedding would be cancelled in a way that made excuses unnecessary. I would not scorch the earth. I would simply reclaim what was mine and remove myself from the role I had been playing for her convenience. What she didn't understand yet was that the hallway scene at 4 in the morning hadn't ruined me. It had freed me from a future built on performance and deception. She thought she had chosen between two men. In reality, she had removed herself from the decision entirely. The next time I would walk through that door, it wouldn't be as someone asking for a place. It would be as someone concluding a transaction. And transactions, unlike promises, don't care about feelings. The second day after I came home was the day reality stopped pretending it cared about anyone's emotions. Logistics took over. Schedules hardened. Decisions stopped feeling heavy and started feeling obvious. I didn't wake up angry or devastated. I woke up focused, which is what happens when betrayal removes confusion instead of creating it. I started with access. Shared accounts were liabilities now, not symbols of trust. Passwords changed methodically, not out of spite but necessity. Subscriptions cancelled. Auto payments reassigned. Anything tied to my name was either secured or shut down. It took less than an hour to dismantle what had taken years to casually intertwine. Relationships feel permanent until you put them into spreadsheets. The lawyer moved quickly. There was no drama because drama only benefits people trying to escape accountability. The lease allowed an exit with penalties that were inconvenient but manageable. The wedding contracts were less forgiving, but still reversible. Venues care about deposits, not heartbreak. Vendors care about deadlines, not explanations. Every call ended the same way, with confirmation sent and obligations reduced to numbers that could be paid or contested. By midday, the life I had planned was officially cancelled in writing. I returned to the apartment late that afternoon, not to argue or confront, but to inventory. The building concierge recognized me and nodded the way people do when they don't know whether to ask questions. I didn't invite conversation. I took the elevator up alone and unlocked the door that had stopped feeling like home the moment someone else answered it. The place smelled different. Not dirty, just altered. There were new groceries in the fridge, unfamiliar brands chosen by someone who hadn't learned my habits. A jacket hung near the door that wasn't mine. Shoes by the couch in a size that didn't fit me. Evidence doesn't need to be dramatic to be overwhelming. Consistency is enough. I moved room by room with a suitcase and a checklist. Personal documents first. Electronics next. Items purchased before the relationship, then those purchased during it. Anything ambiguous stayed. I wasn't interested in winning petty arguments later. I was interested in leaving cleanly. The bedroom was the only space that slowed me down. Not because of sentiment, but because it revealed how thoroughly I had been replaced while I was gone. The nightstand on my side had been cleared. Drawer contents rearranged. A photo frame turned face down, not removed, just hidden. That detail mattered more than anything else. It showed intent. I packed what belonged to me and left the rest exactly as it was. Disruption invites confrontation. Order denies it. As I was leaving, I noticed the engagement ring was missing from the safe. That confirmed what I already knew. She hadn't been confused or caught off guard. She had prepared. She had assumed I wouldn't come back early, wouldn't walk in unannounced, wouldn't force the truth into the open. People don't steal what they think they'll have to return. By evening, the messages intensified. Concern shifted into accusation. Silence was reframed as cruelty. My refusal to engage became proof of my supposed guilt. This pattern was familiar, even if I hadn't recognized it before. When accountability approaches, narratives get rewritten aggressively. I didn't respond. Instead, I sent a single email to the wedding planner, copying both families, confirming the cancellation and requesting formal acknowledgement. No reasons given. No emotional language. Just a statement of fact. The response came back quickly, professional and neutral. That neutrality did more damage than any argument could have. It made the situation real in a way denial couldn't survive. By nightfall, I received calls from people who had never asked questions before. Friends who wanted context. Relatives who wanted reassurance. I let them all go to voicemail. Information spreads faster when you don't control it, but it also mutates. I was fine with that. I didn't need to be understood immediately. I needed to be finished. The next morning, I met with my bank. The joint account was frozen pending separation. New accounts opened. Credit lines reviewed. Anything that required both signatures became a problem I was already solving. The banker didn't ask why. They never do. They see this every day, in different faces, with different stories that end the same way. By midday, the apartment lease exit was approved. I would be off it within weeks. Utilities would revert solely to her unless she chose otherwise. The timeline was tight enough to apply pressure without inviting negotiation. Fairness is a flexible concept. Finality is not. That afternoon, I finally checked the security footage from the building, not because I needed proof, but because I wanted confirmation. The timestamps matched everything. The man had arrived the night after my flight left. He came and went freely. Not once. Not twice. Comfortably. The footage didn't hurt. It aligned. What surprised me was the absence of panic on her part after I left that night. No frantic exits. No rushed conversations. Just routine. That told me everything about how long this had been happening and how little she thought of the risk. That night, I slept in the hotel again, this time without the heaviness I expected. I wasn't mourning the relationship anymore. I was auditing a mistake. Mistakes don't deserve grief. They deserve correction. The final step of the day was drafting a single document. Not a message to her, not an explanation, but a summary of terms. Separation of finances. Move-out timeline. No contact except through legal channels. It was concise, unemotional, and complete. I didn't send it yet. Timing matters. She still thought there was room to talk, to spin, to minimize. She still believed emotions could soften consequences. She was wrong. Part 2 ended with everything prepared and nothing yet enforced. That was intentional. Pressure works best when it's applied all at once, not leaked gradually. She had mistaken my silence for confusion. The next part would correct that misunderstanding permanently. The third day was when silence stopped being passive and became deliberate pressure. Everything that needed to be prepared was already in place. Accounts were locked. Timelines were set. Legal language was drafted with no room for interpretation. All that remained was execution, and execution is always quieter than people expect. I sent the document mid-morning, not as a message but as a formal notice. No greeting. No explanation. Just terms, dates, and consequences laid out with the kind of clarity that removes hope without raising its voice. It went to her personal email, her work email, and her attorney, whose name I had obtained faster than she assumed possible. People relax when they think they have time. I made sure she didn't. Within an hour, the calls started again. Not to negotiate the terms, but to challenge the audacity. Outrage is the refuge of people who realize they've lost control of the narrative. I didn't answer. Responses would have given the impression that this was a conversation. It wasn't. By early afternoon, the apartment had changed hands emotionally even if it hadn't legally yet. Movers arrived while she was at work. Not to clear everything, just to remove what was mine. Furniture I had purchased. Electronics registered under my name. Artwork I had paid to frame. The space was left functional but stripped of comfort. People feel loss more sharply when it's precise. I instructed the movers to be professional and brief. No commentary. No reactions. Inventory signed. Photos taken. Departure completed. Efficiency can feel brutal when you're on the receiving end of it. Her reaction came indirectly. Friends reached out, confused, suddenly aware that something serious was unfolding without their involvement. I gave them nothing. Explanations invite sides. Facts end discussions. Anyone who needed to know would know soon enough. Later that afternoon, the engagement ring surfaced. It was returned through a courier, not by her. That detail mattered. It showed hesitation, shame, or calculation. Possibly all three. I logged it, secured it, and updated the inventory. Sentiment has no place in record keeping. By evening, the financial consequences became unavoidable. The joint account freeze meant rent, subscriptions, and everyday expenses were no longer invisible. When people rely on shared systems, they underestimate how much those systems cushion them. Removing that cushion forces reality to make contact. She finally sent a written response. Not an apology. Not an admission. A protest. She framed my actions as extreme, unnecessary, disproportionate. She questioned my timing, my tone, my refusal to communicate. She positioned herself as someone being punished rather than someone facing outcomes. I read it once, forwarded it to my lawyer, and archived it. Emotional language is irrelevant once boundaries are set. That night, I received confirmation from the venue that the cancellation had been finalized. No refunds beyond what had already been agreed. The date was released. The room was available again. The wedding officially ceased to exist in the system. That administrative confirmation felt more real than any conversation we could have had. The next morning, I went to the apartment one last time, accompanied by a neutral third party to collect the remaining items. She wasn't there. Either by choice or advice. The absence was mutual and appropriate. I didn't need closure. I needed completion. The space felt hollow now. Not tragic, just unfinished. A place paused between two lives, belonging fully to neither. I took what remained, documented the condition, and left the keys on the counter. The door closed behind me for the last time with the same sound it had made when I left that first morning. Familiar. Final. By midday, the lease termination was acknowledged in writing. The timeline was locked. Any remaining obligations were hers alone unless disputed legally. I was removed from the address, from the utilities, from the shared future she had assumed would remain accessible. Word spread faster after that. Families talked. Friends compared notes. Stories aligned. The man from that night was identified without my involvement. Patterns emerged. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a system she had built quietly, relying on my absence and my trust. I didn't correct anyone's assumptions. People fill gaps with the truth more often than with kindness. That evening, I deleted our message history. Not out of anger, but because archives belong to people who plan to revisit the past. I didn't. The relationship was no longer a chapter in my life. It was an expense that had been settled. What remained was forward motion. Work resumed at full pace. Social obligations recalibrated. The future reopened, not optimistically, but realistically. Trust would not be automatic again. It would be conditional, verified, earned. Part 3 ended with separation fully enforced and denial no longer available to her. She had lost access, resources, and credibility in the same quiet sequence she had once assumed would never be used against her. What she still didn't understand was that the final part wasn't about recovery or revenge. It was about rebalancing power and making sure the lesson was permanent, not emotional. That realization was coming next. The last phase didn't arrive with drama or confrontation. It arrived with distance. Once everything was executed, there was nothing left to manage except my own trajectory. That's the part people misunderstand. Endings aren't explosive when you handle them correctly. They are controlled. Weeks passed. The lease expired. The apartment was no longer connected to my name. The ring remained in the safe deposit box, untouched, a reminder of a future that had existed only because I had been financing it emotionally and practically. The wedding date came and went without incident. No public collapse. No grand announcement. Just a quiet absence where something expensive had once been planned. She attempted contact twice through indirect channels. Not legal, not logistical. Emotional. Each attempt followed the same structure. Regret framed as confusion. Responsibility diluted into circumstances. Curiosity about my silence disguised as concern for my well-being. I didn't respond. Silence after boundaries have been stated is not cruelty. It is enforcement. What followed was predictable. Social consequences arrived slowly, then all at once. People noticed who was no longer present. Stories no longer aligned. Explanations required effort she wasn't prepared to sustain. The man from that night didn't stay. Men who arrive easily leave the same way. Stability is unattractive to people who confuse excitement with value. I didn't need to hear about it, but information travels when you stop participating. Friends updated me unintentionally. Mutual acquaintances corrected themselves mid-sentence. The narrative adjusted without my involvement. That was the most effective outcome. When you don't argue your side, people pay closer attention to patterns. Professionally, nothing suffered. If anything, focus improved. Energy previously spent maintaining a relationship built on performance was redirected into work that returned measurable results. Sleep normalized. Decisions sharpened. I stopped carrying the background anxiety that comes from trusting someone who doesn't deserve it. I moved into a new place without ceremony. Minimal furniture. Clean lines. Nothing chosen to accommodate another person's preferences. The quiet felt earned. The space felt honest. For the first time in a long while, everything in my life existed because I had decided it should. Months later, the ring was sold. Not out of spite, but because storage is for things you intend to use. The money went into an account labeled clearly, without sentiment or symbolism. Closure doesn't require rituals. It requires finality. The only time I saw her again was by coincidence, not design. Across a room. Public. Brief. No conversation. Recognition passed without acknowledgement. She looked smaller, not physically, but structurally. Like someone whose assumptions had collapsed and not yet been replaced. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. Distance is healthier than victory. That night at 4 a.m. never replayed in my head the way people imagine betrayal does. It didn't need to. It had served its purpose immediately. It showed me who I was dealing with before contracts became permanent and lives became legally inseparable. Some warnings arrive early enough to be useful. I didn't rebuild myself because I wasn't destroyed. I recalibrated. There's a difference. Destruction requires recovery. Misjudgment requires correction. What she thought was a choice between two men was actually a test of boundaries. She failed it decisively. Not because she was unfaithful, but because she assumed loyalty was guaranteed and accountability was optional. That assumption ended the moment I walked out and never argued. The lesson wasn't learned through punishment or humiliation. It was learned through consequences that arrived cleanly and stayed. Access removed. Support withdrawn. Futures cancelled. All without noise. People ask later how I got through it so quickly. The answer is simple. I didn't waste time trying to understand behavior that had already explained itself. I accepted the information and acted accordingly. That's how the story ended. Not with closure conversations or emotional resolutions, but with a life that continued without the weight of someone who mistook my trust for permission.